All right, thanks very much. We're very glad to be here and, in the esteemed after lunch slot. So trying to keep this fast and light and quick moving for you. So a little bit about us. I'm Rob Caldwell, work for Mandiant, principal consultant. Chris.
I also work with Rob. We've been at Mandiant almost 2 years now in our industrial control system consulting practice.
So some of the introductory topics here that we have, other talks have covered them, and we're going to kind of work through this stuff. But one of the reasons we want to talk through is the poll that was up during Rob Lee's presentation the other day. So we're really excited to see that, number one, people are actually implementing NSM on control systems. 13% had done it. 25% had done it integrated with the IT and the ICS NSM. So that's a great thing. So what we're really addressing here are the other folks that have projects towards that, the ones that haven't even thought about it yet, and then especially the group that said, no, we don't see a need for that. So we'd like to help kind of move you towards the believer segment through this talk. So, good picture here. What happens when you use Nmap or a fuzzer on ICS? Right. And one of the things that we get asked when we talk to customers, when we go out is, if ICS are so vulnerable, why haven't we seen more attacks? And our position is really it's because we're not looking. And two components to that. So number one, there's an attention factor. And Rob talked about that. Mark talked about that a little bit in his presentation. But what we're going to focus on today is visibility into these systems. So if you think back to intent, like we mentioned, there's very little information that's been out there except for the couple of attacks that we have. And the key thing is these attackers are not, it's not technology, right? They're people sitting behind desks doing their job to attack your system. And so that's really the key point that we want to get into today is visibility, right? We're not really looking into these systems. And what we see from a Mandiant perspective is in over 2/3 of the cases, and this is across all the response that we do, in 2/3 of the cases, it's an outside organization that is coming to the company and saying, you've been breached. We found your information. So Chris did some research, to kind of feed through why we're concerned about this. Chris did some research on what are the different vulnerabilities that have been exposed. And of course you see, right around 2010, a real peak based on Stuxnet. So people are interested in this space, right? There's a lot more attention. And if you get hacked, what does that mean, right? So you can't continue to make money. You can't make what you're making. So given this kind of spot that we're in right now, we see a lot more government regulation coming. There's a lack of addressing the issue from a vendor perspective. I came from a vendor. It was very hard as a security person in the vendor to kind of build that case and make people understand in the business level why we've got to go address these security vulnerabilities. And even when those are done, applying the patches, replacing equipment, that's a very, very long cycle activity. And so our position is really breaches are inevitable. And so what are we going to do about it? And that's why we'd like to introduce kind of the topic of network security monitoring from a tools perspective. This is a definition that's kind of been bandied about, kind of refined over the years from our chief technologist, Richard Bakelick. It's not a new concept, right? So network security monitoring goes back to the 90s. And really, it's come through various forms through the years, kind of refined and codified, but way back in 2002. And so it's not a new topic, and it's not a new topic in IT security, but we really haven't seen that many folks start adapting it and using it in control system monitoring until the last year or so.
One thing is that book, The Cuckoo's Egg, with Cliff Stoll in 1986, found a 75-cent accounting difference in the software mainframe access for Lawrence Berkeley Labs, where different accounts would come in, like the math department or the physics department would run programs, and they found a 75-cent accounting difference in their software. And then that said, well, why is there a 75 difference? And then he looked into it. There's an account that wasn't supposed to be there. He deleted it. It came back. And he kept looking and looking and looking. And then over a year later, after doing all this searching and hunting, they found out it was a hacker coming all the way from Hanover, Germany. And they eventually caught and arrested the guy. So it's, if you look at your network, of all the 80 systems that the attacker from Germany got into, only 2 noticed.
And so what we really want to focus on today is the tools that you can use, some of the free and open source things that are out there. And if you think through the maturity level of these, some of these tools are actually very, very good. And in the class Chris gave the other day, there was a question about, well, these free tools have limitations. And so think of it not just from a perspective of we're introducing some free tools, but these will give you the capability and the ideas and the foundation behind network security monitoring. And then if you need further capability, you can go research commercial tools. But we really didn't want to make this a commercial tool discussion. The other important point, and you'll hear us hit this over and over, is it's not a tool discussion. It's a person discussion, right? You're looking, the adversary is also a person. And so you need, intellectually curious, skilled people to go and look at these tools to kind of find evil in the system. So from the kind of the general cycle, and Rob went into this in detail, so did Mark, as far as kind of the whole process, but you can think of it from 3 real stages, right? So there's the collection, the detection, and analysis, and it's cyclical, right? And so, once again, it's more of a model for action for people rather than just technology and blinky light boxes that will alarm when something happens. And so, there again, it's that focus on the adversary, not the vulnerability. So getting this data, and Chris will get into a lot more of the tools. We just kind of wanted to give you some highlights here, different ways to collect this data. Of course, there's network taps. The guys at Garland downstairs in the Geek Lounge have a couple of those down there. You can do, mirrored ports on switches to collect the traffic. Naturally, collecting directly from a host, like say running Security Onion or Wireshark or TCP dump right on a laptop that's connected, or even doing serial traffic capture from a serial tab. So those are some of the different methods of monitoring. And there's a lot of information we're going through here very quickly because I want to give Chris a chance to talk through the tools for you. When we look at the data that we have, there's basically 7 types of collected data, and what Chris will do is go through these and match these types up to the different tools that we use to look at this data. And these fill different purposes within the whole network security monitoring and response and detection things. So full content data is like a DVR. It's a full packet capture collection of everything that's happened. And then down into that, you can pull content out of that. You can see which files are transferred, picking up web pages or images, things like that. Session data, talking about the conversation between the nodes. Transaction data, very similar to that. And then even statistical data. So getting, what are the top talkers on the network? Which nodes are talking? What type of traffic? What ports? What percentage of the traffic is that? Down into metadata. So one of the things that we do is we'll pull DNS queries off of the network that we see from the control system. We'll look at those. Some of them are pretty obvious. I think you found, Free Sexy Comics one time?
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
some of them are pretty obvious. Some of them are not, right? So we'll bounce those against known databases of websites that have been compromised or hosting malware or command and control, things like that. And then finally, down into some of the things that are really particular to control systems, that alert and log data. So if there's any kind of syslog data or any kind of log data from the PLCs or things that we can't, put more of the IT type agents on, that's real good information to know as well. So with that, some of the difficulties that NSM has, particularly in an IT environment, around encrypted networks. So if you can't understand the traffic, all you see is that there's a conversation, right? You can't get down and do deep packet inspection. widespread use of NAT, where if you don't have both sides of the conversation, you can't really tell who's talking to whom. Devices moving in and out of the network, mobile devices, huge traffic volumes, and then most importantly, privacy concerns, right? So when you're doing network security monitoring, you're monitoring people and what they do. So there are privacy concerns. But fortunately, a lot of these things are issues that we don't face in ICS, right? Especially privacy concerns. So what I'm going to do is pass off to Chris here. Chris, talk about one of the case studies we saw recently where a company implemented NSM and actually saw some operational benefits.
Thanks, Rob. So a colleague of ours in the U.S. at a California utility company was able to implement network security monitoring to their transmission and distribution networks. They did full deep packet inspection on their industrial control system protocols like DMP3 and Modbus, and having that visibility into their entire network showed them some really important things. That was, even though they were looking for evil, they also found some misconfiguration, RTUs that might have been configured wrong. They found firmware and hardware defects that might have been something that they had to get the vendor to fix. They had unexpected IPs on the network. They had unexpected SCADA protocols, and then unexpected or incorrect SCADA function codes that were set up. So they had all of these things, and their operators could get a view into their SIM, and they could download those packet captures, look at the data, and say, hey, this is what's wrong with our network. We can fix these things, and now we've cleaned up our network, and now our ICS and SCADA system looks like a heartbeat. And you can really see and reduce the signal-to-noise ratio and just see clearly what's going on and not seeing a lot of a message.
And what was implemented as a IT security and a security measure has really become an operational efficiency benefit. And those operators are now the biggest proponents of network security monitoring. They love it. They would actually, the funding, they're thinking about switching that from IT over to operations.
Yes. So here's an example control system. At the top you have the regular IT, and if you have a firewall with a DMZ, that you might have a web or a historian, where your IT or maybe your engineers on the corporate network can get data from, for instance, the historian. And then down below that is the plant level, where there's the HMI, the DCS, the SCADA, the databases, another historian. And then the lower level, the level 1 and level 0, is your control, your PLCs, your RTUs, your PACs, your sensors, and things like that. What we're going to do is show how we can attack this, or how an attacker would go about doing that. This is the standard kill chain. You've probably seen how this happens before, but you do some initial recon. You want to compromise a certain machine, establish a foothold or persistence, and then you want to move around and escalate privileges and maintain more presence, and then complete your mission, whatever that might be. In most of our investigations with Mandiant, only a little more than half of the victim computers had malware on them. So what does that say? We have, I think 100% in our last report showed that they used stolen credentials. Mm-hmm. We apply that model to the control system network, and what are the attacker's goals? Well, we can say, we can damage the equipment, steal process information or intellectual property, cause a safety or compliance issue, say shut down the combined cycle plant by causing emissions reporting issues, or pivot from a vulnerable ICS up to the enterprise. So come in the back door where IT may not be monitoring.
And that's exactly what we saw in the case of the Target breach, where the HVAC system was used as an entry point into the point of sale system.
So the attacker has a couple of options. He either has to gain access physically to a host or have remote access to an ICS host. Well, maybe it's connected to the internet or routed to the internet or routed through an open channel through their firewall, something like that. Or you have to compromise a engineering workstation or laptop, something like that. So let's do some network security monitoring. This is a picture of our Hunter. We're going to use this Hunter theme. If you don't know who this is very familiar. Do you know, anybody know who this is? Okay, a few people in here. It's Mike Asante. He is the, yeah, you know who it is. Mike Asante, very smart guy, been proponent of control system security in the U.S. and all over the world for several years, at least a decade. Before we can hunt and find evil, we need several things. We need an inquisitive mind, ask questions. We need to have the right collection tools, so like your binoculars. You want to be able to get that visibility into your control system network. Then you want to have a hunting tool, so a way to search and pivot and peel back the layers of your network and look and see where evil might be hiding. And last of all, you want to protect your system. So you want to protect your monitors, you want to protect your sensors, because if you don't, then an attacker might come in and say, oh, I found their network security monitor sensor, and let's just use all that information, or we can just delete the database.
Right.
So
thank you for the reconnaissance ahead of time. Right.
Yes. So let's take this and put it in context. Let's put the sensors around our collection phase. Let's put these sensors in our IT down to the control system network. Well, I've chopped off the IT part, so in the DMZ, they might be more of like a data center type area. So you use standard enterprise collectors like your agents, your full packet capture, everything that you can imagine where we do it today. It's syslog. The blue dots on the edge, those are network sensors just collecting packet captures or session data. And the red dots in the plant level, you have logs and or agents. So if you have a Windows HMI, collect the Windows event logs or all these types of error logs. Some might have antivirus installed, so you can collect those logs. And then when we get down to the control level, there may not be many logs at all. So we can collect bandwidth or collect SNMP responses on the like CPU percent usage, things like that. So let's go back to our, go ahead.
Yeah, and we're big proponents, which is why we were so excited to see some of the respondents to that survey, big proponents of putting this together with the same NSM for the IT side of the house. So getting that full picture of not just, ICS in one silo and IT in another silo, but converging that picture together. Because we believe that's one way that you can effectively hunt, is seeing the flow of a potential attacker, perhaps knocking on the door of the ICS from the IT side.
So back to our hunting metaphor, let's look at the traffic in our woods. So let's look at all the animal tracks in the mud, and we see deer, we see wolf, we see birds, we see all kinds of animals, and we can see where they're going to, and then we put up a trail camera so we can actually get pictures and see what kind of animals walking where, what are they doing. That gives us our visibility. So what are we looking for in a control system? We look for the exceptions from the baseline. So that heartbeat that's normal and cyclical in our control system, we see A talks to B, but B never talks to C. We have our top talkers. We look for unexpected connectivity. So we normally don't connect to the internet, but if we see something trying to beacon out and do DNS requests or trying to connect to the internet, but it's getting blocked, we'll look for those. logins using default accounts that you cannot change. So you look for the admin or the root passwords of all of these control systems that you cannot change, but you can at least look for them across the wire. Error message that could correlate to vulnerabilities, unexpected file and firmware updates, antivirus alerts, things like that. So that's our collection phase. Let's go to the detection and more the hunting. Analyst is going to look at all of these different things and say, do we need to escalate this to incident response, or is this just a problem that the people in the field need to go fix?
And that's why, when Rob showed you the other day, the difference between the before and the after image with the malware that he put on, it's so critical to get that before image and to know what the baseline of the system is before you get into a situation where you need to do that comparison.
So when someone logs into an RTU at this substation, well, let's look and see if they checked into that substation in the logs, or did they call the operators at the SCADA desk and see if they checked in. Do they match up? Then if they don't, then that raises another question. Or if a device is going online or offline or behaving strange, things like that. So what is the detection in our hunting metaphor? So we notice a big track, and this is bigger than a dog track, so it's probably a wolf. And we know it's a wolf because I found it online. Or we see with our webcam or our trail camera, we can see that a wild boar is eating our corn that we were intended for other animals to eat, and he's trying to knock it over. So having that visibility allows us to see these things, potential threats to our system. Now we go to the analysis phase where we're already detecting these types of evil and attacks. So we see application exploitation, third-party connections, say from one utility to another or from one plant to another. ICS-specific communication attacks like Modbus fuzzing. We can see USB-delivered malware propagating. This is one of my favorite pictures that I found. You can see the little bunny rabbits hopping along, and then you see the outline of the owl's wings landed and grabbed the little rabbit, and there's no more tracks after that. And then our trail camera sees actually the owl carrying the rabbit off. So we see this attack happen. Well, we can also see strange attacks happen if we're looking. So did you know that flying squirrels attack deer? So I didn't know that until I did some research, and apparently flying squirrels like to attack deer, at least in the U.S.
So give them some examples of tools that they can use.
Here's some examples using Security Onion. For those of you who might have taken my class, this should look somewhat familiar to you. But what we did is we got some real-world packet capture from customers or engagements that we've been on, or some things that we replicated in the lab, and we'll show you some actual examples. So this is session data, which is basically like a phone bill, not a full conversation like a full voice recording. It just shows who is calling whom and how long and the ports. So this one was from a customer that we did an engagement on, and we just did a simple search. And if you cannot see it, there's the to and from IP, and then we filtered on the byte count. So if you notice, we have the byte count circled, and it's several orders of magnitude larger than the rest of the traffic. And we see that the source port is port 80. So we know that just looking at this phone call, it's probably HTTP traffic. Is that supposed to be happening? We don't really know. The web traffic that's similar to it below it is a lot smaller in count. So is someone downloading a file, or is it a webcam sending a large packet stream? And then down below that we see NetBIOS and NTP based on their port assignments.
So once again, if you know what your system's normal state is, things like this stick out like a sore thumb.
Yep. So this is where I suggest starting to hunt from looking at smaller types of data and going more into richer type data. This is using Eric's network miner. We played a packet capture through, and this one shows Ethernet MAC has changed possible ARP spoofing. So a MAC address should not change. It did in this case. There's a lot of other tabs in Network Miner. If you took his class, he probably showed you some more things about it. Really interesting. Another tab is called DNS. So we saw strange DNS requests, and it's kind of hard to see, but there is a flashservice.adobe.com. So more than likely, something with Adobe Flash is trying to update. And then down below, it looks like the red square moved when we copied the slide over, but there's a DNS server named infoc.duba.net and then ivt.ihabit.biz. Why is that going to from our control system out to the internet? Those don't make any sense. We can also look at the same thing in ELSA. ELSA is a way to look at different logs that the Bro IDS parses from Security Onion. So we look at the DNS request and we see the same thing, flash service adobe.com, digitalwebcontrol.us, RDNS, orionNVM.com.au, primody.com, some weird things. Why are we doing these requests? Is it like a web page that has a strange bar on it that's trying to get advertisements? We don't know. Okay, how many people have used Wireshark before? Okay, good. So this is using Wireshark. We did deep packet inspection of Modbus. So Modbus and about 20 or 30 different other control system protocols are understood by Wireshark. So I fuzzed some DMP devices in my lab with a fuzzer that Adam Crane and I wrote, mainly Adam Crane. It's called Aegis. And you select a filter, MB TCP, Modbus TCP, and then we selected one of the rows there, and then in red it shows malformed Modbus. Then we did a filter on the protocol hierarchy statistics, and it said 20% of the Modbus traffic was malformed. So we can make the conclusion that someone was fuzzing Modbus, which was the case.
And once again, kind of back to that operational tie-in with these tools. You know, Chris has used this in the past to actually debug ICS issues. And so that's where you can really kind of cross that line and give your operators benefit from implementing a security tool.
Yes. There's this function code that's not used in the standard. There's called Modbus function code 90. Well, a Modicon, Schneider Modicon PLC uses function code 90 to do starts and stops and other administrator type requests. Well, it's unauthenticated, and our friends at Digital Bond, they wrote a Metasploit module to take advantage of that. So they can send function code 90 and get some ladder logic and some other things off of the PLC and even the passwords. And you can see that it says unknown function code 90, and the red arrow shows Schneider and unknown 90. So we know that this was the actual Schneider PLC sending this. So there's some IDS logs that understand, in Security Onion, that understand control system protocols. Bro IDS has been around for quite a while, and it understands DMP3 and Modbus. University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign has gotten a grant from the government to add more ICS protocols to Bro, so stay tuned on that. Snort has been around quite a while, and it understands DMP3 and Modbus. And then there's the Emerging Threats SCADA pack and the Digital Bond Quick Draw Snort rules that we actually use in our class. So we installed some of the Quick Draw Snort rules, played a Modbus packet capture, and then the alerts fired in Snort. Then the last one is Suricata. This is a different type of IDS. and it has a brand new DMP3 parser and also has the emerging threats SCADA rules. So this is a sample of me doing Modbus and DMP3 fuzzing, and Bro IDS parsed it and it showed up in the weird log. So it says out of bound recoil request 4.3, and it shows reholding register request, and then DMP3 unexpected flow direction. So it's really handy to see that your IDSs, these are open source and free. They already understand some of these protocols. Again, some of the same thing you can see in ELSA, which can look at all the Bro logs. There's a GUI tool that your analysts in your security operations center like to have GUI tools on their screens, and allows them to look at a bunch of alerts at the same time. There's this one tool called Squeal. So if there's a snort alert that comes up, for instance, the one that's highlighted is alerted to the Poodle attack that was pretty recent. You can see what sensor it's coming from, the date, the IP address, and then down in the bottom left, you can see the actual packet payload that actually triggered that alert. So very handy to have. Syslog, this is very cool and very good news. Now, Syslog is starting to show up in control system devices down to the PLCs and RTUs. It can be configured to send syslog to the NSM sensor, or Bro can see syslog go across the wire and parse the syslog data. So I logged into a Schweitzer 3530 RTAC. It's a pretty new RTU. And I tried logging in incorrectly, and sure enough, in the red circle, it shows that Mandiant login attempt failed. And then I logged in correctly, and then it showed up in the logs. So here's some examples of some RTUs and PLCs that actually have syslog. Hopefully, if you have these devices, that you can start collecting these and see when people log into them or not. So the Schweitzer RTAC GE D20MX, the L90 Relay, the Novatech Orion LX, Cooper S&P, Schneider Modicon, Siemens S7 400, 300, 400, and 1500, you have to enable the syslog function block, and a whole array of industrial Ethernet switches have syslog. So Rob talked about the 7 different data types. Security Onion has tools for just about every bit of that. So full packet capture, TCP dump, Wireshark, and network miner. Extracted content that's pulling the files, pulling the images. We were at a power plant, and we ran a packet capture through network miner, and we were able to see when the operator was searching for a new Ford truck to buy, and we saw the different Fords show up in the pictures. And
Pick this one.
Yeah, get this one. That's the one you want. Get the blue one. So you have Explico and Network Miner both do those. Session data, Bro does it. Flowbat is another tool that I'll talk about soon. Transaction data, Bro. Statistical data, metadata, and alert data. That's all there. So here's some more screenshots of what Security Onion tools look like. So you've got command line tools, and you've got GUI-based tools for those who need that. NetFlow is, like I said before, one of the great ways to start it. You don't have to wade through a mountain of data. You can just look at the phone bill and see who called who, and hey, this guy's not supposed to be calling my daughter. That's not supposed to happen until she turns 16. So we need to stop that immediately. So you can go to flowbat.com. 2 of my coworkers at Mandiant wrote this, and it's a very nice GUI tool that uses Silk, which has been around a long time. And then you can filter on all of these things and download them to a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet to do further analysis.
And so maybe explain a little bit more. We've talked about all these tools, but what about Security Onion? It's kind of a term you haven't really defined.
Yes. Okay. Security Onion is a open source Linux distribution that's free, that's been invented and kind of collected and supported since 2008 by a man named Doug Burks. And that's all he does. He's been supporting that for quite a while. So if we're going, and Security Onion is actually deployed in many companies, and they have singular deployments and many deployments. If we want to implement Security Onion in a control system environment, we have some things that we want to do. We want to make sure we test it in a lab first. We want to make sure that we have a suitable hardware platform. So we're doing packet capture. We want to make sure the more RAM that we have, the better. The bigger the hard drive, the better. Make sure we have the right mirrored port or the right spin port. Or if there's not that available, we have to take an outage to the network and put in a tap to collect these data and make sure we put it in the right place. So there's 2 books that I'm going to mention that talk about that, the practice of network security monitoring and applied network security monitoring. They show diagrams of all different types of networks and where to place these sensors. And then make sure to work with the right stakeholders. So work with the engineers, work with their vendors, work with the technicians to put these and support these in the right place. So down in the lab, I've actually got an example of Security Onion running on a industrially hardened machine. It's a Schweitzer 3355. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It's got up to 1 terabyte of solid state drive, so you could put it out in a harsh industrial environment and it'll last. There are other boxes out there as well, like Moxa, Advantech, several others that are hardened. So I pick on Schweitzer a little bit, but I really like these guys. The front looks like the George Foreman grill. So George loves cooking in the substation with his new line of industrial grills from Schweitzer. So here's the others that I was mentioning, the Moxa and the Advantech and the other Schweitzer. Very great industrial, basically computers, but you can put security on them. Now, if you want to do port mirroring, let's do it for a serial network, because we still have a lot of serial 1200 baud out there. I know I did when I was working at the power company. The only one that's out there that I found is the Schweitzer 3610. I looked at old Cisco, old Juniper, everything. This is the only one that allows you to take an in serial and then out serial and then copy all that traffic to a TCP port and ship it out. So you could analyze it with, say, Wireshark. So if you ever watched Cliff Stoll, he was looking through all of his printouts on the printer paper. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. And you can install Bro on a smaller sensor, like a smaller Advantech box, or do like what Eric has down in the lab down there in the Geek Lounge. He's got just some packet captures going on, and that he can ship that up and analyze them later. Or you can even put it on a Raspberry Pi 2 if you just really need some visibility, quick visibility into your network. So we call it the security ogre. Onions have layers. Good security has layers. Onions smell bad. Quite often, security stinks. Onions make you cry. Poor security can make you cry, scream, and curse. Welcome to Security Onion. So that's a good picture that we found. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, so just to wrap up here real quick, and we'll take some of the questions, but it's about the people, right? So you can put in all these tools, but you have to have people that understand the data. You're never going to automate a person out of this loop. Really, it's, people are the best pattern detectors that we have right now. There may come a point in time when commercial software can exceed that, but right now, you've got to get people into the system to look at this stuff. And remember, the adversary is not technology, right? It's another person. Some quick takeaways, that Chris talked through here. You can do this today, right? So the tools are there today. You can implement simple NSM on your ICS systems without impact. Those free tools that we went through, help you start looking for evil. Here's some references for you. The books that Chris has talked about. Another good, actually 2 good references here. There's a whole NSM wiki run by a bunch of guys that are really into this. And then also the security, the link to Security Egg in there as well.
Yeah, if you watch if you haven't read the book, the Cuckoo's Egg, I really highly recommend that book. And also, if you don't like to read, there's a movie that was put out by public TV, and it's been from 1990. They recorded it on, and they put it on YouTube, so you can go watch that.
All right, so thanks very much, and we'll take questions.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, there are some.
Good.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. It's exciting area. So 99% of incidents comes from portable media. How would NSM help me with that? Is one question from the audience.
Okay, so I would disagree that 99% of those come. That may be the, prototypical case from Stuxnet, but we've seen a lot of incidents that have not been from portable media. So we've seen companies being phished by email, and then moving down from the corporate network into at least very close to, if not into, some of the control systems, more from a reconnaissance point of view. But so we would disagree that 99%.
Yeah, that's fine.
And the other thing, though, is that with network security monitoring, even if it is a USB type attack, if something needs to communicate, like either to spread or to go back to a command and control center, you're going to pick that up.
But don't forget about
You know
host-based.
what? I think it's
That's good.
clear,
Sure.
yeah.
Don't forget about host-based detectors as well. So if you don't have antivirus, you might have application whitelisting that might be installed that looks for any changes that try to change files on your system, and that will create alerts that you can collect and monitor as well. Yes, you pick it up in the logs.
So the audience here wants more of advice. Could you name one or two good network taps?
Okay, so network taps, there's several out there, Datacom, and then there's Garland. Remember that you want to make sure that you pick a data tap when you get ready to install it, that you can't just take the plant down because you actually have to break the connection, put the tap in line, and then put it back together. So also you want to make sure that the tap can support the bandwidth, and also if the tap fails, that the traffic can still go through it passively. So we got to make sure that those qualifications are met.
And they'll gladly demonstrate that to you, right? Up and running, they'll pull the power on it, and your traffic will still go through.
Okay. And can you mention some hardware that goes well with the open source tools?
So Chris actually had a number in there.
Okay, that was.
Yeah, that was.
I guess it was in the end.
Yeah, so
okay.
that was answered already.
So that answer has already. Oh, that question has already been answered. How do you collaborate with UIUC? Do you further develop the protocol parsers to use it as a product commercially?
So we're not into that from a commercial standpoint. The partnership has really been between the University of Champaign, Illinois, and Bro. That was the partnership.
Oh, yeah.
We're just an end user of those protocol parsers.
So asset owners using NSM for the first time often get overwhelmed. What three things can they tune in to effectively monitor and without getting alarm fatigue?
Okay, so if you're going to do things for the very first time, just looking at maybe a 15-minute capture of your network, and then doing a look of all the different endpoints to see if all those IP addresses match what you know is in your database. And then also matching the ports and services. So if you know you have port 80 and maybe RDP to 3389 or DMP3 20,000 or IEC 104 or OSI Pi 5450 or Modbus, you want to make sure that all of these things match up. And then from there you can start to go and look further.
And like Chris mentioned earlier too, a great place to start is with that session. Just look at who is talking to whom, and does that make sense, right? So that's moving, past all these alarms and alerts, but looking just who is talking to whom, and is that the expected behavior? That's a great place to start, rather than digging into all the alarms in depth.
Yep. Good advice. And the audience have been quite honest about would they be able to detect an intruder in the ICS system. Most of them said no. And so now you have learned how to do it, where to start. Just begin.
Just start looking.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Start with a simple packet capture.
Understand what your system's like today and then look for change.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.